A common narrative in our culture today is that there is a conflict between science and the Christian faith, that scientific advances make it impossible to embrace the idea that God exists and that the Christian faith is valid. But is this really the case? I'm joined today by George Haraksin, who is a philosopher and a Christian, to help unpack that question. George, from a philosophical perspective, has there ever been a science faith issue that you have wrestled through with, and then how did you resolve that issue?
Yeah, I think just a prior answer to the question, I think it's good to remember that both in the disciplines of philosophy or even in science, there's internal conflicts that we're always wrestling with. Philosophers have those problems. Obviously, scientists have those problems. So I think it's important to remind people that within disciplines, we all wrestle with problems and conflicts that we're trying to resolve. So it shouldn't be surprising that we will have to encounter conflicts when it comes to the discipline of science or philosophy and our faith, what we believe about the world and God and things of that nature. For me in particular, though I'm not a scientist, I've always had a love for science and technology, and have had great interest in it. And though my field I went towards philosophy, there are many conflicts that I've had to wrestle with. And one in particular, I have to say, honestly, still wrestling with, and I think more work needs to be done. It has a long historical tradition of being a problem, but in philosophy, we call it, in the philosophy of mind, there's an issue that arises in what's called, if you are a dualist when it comes to the human person. The question is, are we composed of just body and brain, we're just material? Are we just composed of spirit? There have been views that just have held that. But if we're composed of two ontological realities, body and soul, or body and spirit, body and mind, how do those two realities causally interact with one another? So from all the way back from the time of Descartes, people like Malebranche, Leibniz, all have tried to offer solutions to that issue. And one might wonder, well, what's really the issue? And to speak of it in a contemporary way, if there is something called a soul, a mind that's immaterial, incorporeal, and we also have a body, and if these two are intimately linked to one another, how does the mind causally interact with the body or the brain, and doesn't violate the law of conservation, that energy can't be created or destroyed? And this raises the problem because it would seemingly be that a mind is, if it's causally interacting into a closed system, would somehow be creating energy or introducing something into that system. Mm-hmm. So that would be what I would call sort of the micro problem of dealing with how would a soul and body, how do they interact causally speaking? And then you can make it into a more macro problem, which is the issue of divine agency. How does an immaterial being such as God causally interact with a physical, natural world that, according to science, is a closed system in energy? And so this is a problem that philosophers have tried to work on, and it's a contemporary issue that some contemporary philosophers are working on. Someone like Robert Larmer is doing some good work on this, and I haven't resolved it, honestly, to at least my satisfaction. I'm getting into the issue right now and getting caught up on some of the literature in that. But I would highly recommend Robert Larmer's work on divine agency. Mm-hmm. And then that will be a bigger issue, but it will also play into the mind-body issue. Now, of course, some people have just said, well, let's just get rid of mind and spirit and soul. We can use those words, but they don't refer to or reflect a different reality than the material world. We just use those words as useful fictions, kind of. And so there are a few Christians, it's a minority view, who are materialists, who say, well, that's not a problem because we're just body and a complex brain, and there is no such thing as mind or soul. Others historically have actually got rid of what we call matter. They think there's a huge problem with a description philosophically of matter, and there's just simply spirit or soul. I tend to lean, and I think both the Old and New Testaments and Jesus' own view seems to point to some type of what philosophers call substance dualism. And if that's the case, I think we need to reconcile how those two causally interact with one another.
But from your perspective, this conflict isn't a reason to doubt the truth of the Christian faith then?
No, it's a fun problem to work on, actually. Just like the scientist, goes to discover things about aerodynamics or the inflationary model of the universe, of the Big Bang, and that. You start to investigate the natural world and you discover all these interesting features about it and how it works and how we don't understand it. And I think this is an area where philosophers and scientists can work together to try to discover exactly what's going on here. So my approach is to hold my view. I hold it confidently, but I'm open to being wrong about it. And then keep working on what might be good solutions to where we either hold to the current scientific view, and maybe it needs to be revised in some way, or maybe our view of dualism has to be nuanced in some other way. So it doesn't trouble me in my Christian faith. In fact, it should be fuel to excitement to a problem to work on is the way I would approach it.